Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Phil is the owner and head trainer with Sit Means Sit Dog Training, New Hampshire. And with over a decade of professional dog training experience, he has helped thousands of families have more freedom, safety, and confidence with their dogs. Phil's also a father to 3 wonderful children, and so I'm super excited to have him on the podcast today for a little bit different of an episode as we chat about dogs and babies. So let's get into it. I'm so excited. Thank you, Phil, for joining me today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So we met at a fair, which was kind of cool. I may or may not have been death staring you and your dog across the driveway that we were at the entire time until I finally was like, I'm just gonna go say hi. So I'm glad that they put us across from each other, because bringing somebody on to talk about like pet introductions, specifically like dogs and babies, has been something that I think a lot of my audience has been asking questions about, specifically my postpartum clients when I'm working with them. So I'm excited to hear all the tips and tricks that you've got for us today.
Perfect. Glad to be here.
Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about you and kind of like your training background and all this fun stuff that got you to where you are now? And then we'll kind of dive into the more specific topic of it all.
Yeah. I've been a professional dog trainer for over a decade now. So I've been involved with or overseen, I don't know, I think 4,000 some dogs, go through
Wow.
different training. And so I really see everything that you can think of. I've pretty much seen it. And but more importantly for this conversation, I'm a father of 3 kids. And so I've also raised dogs and
Yep.
kids and kind of seen some of that interaction. And it's really, a very important topic to me as a father, but also as a canine professional, being able to kind of merge those 2 worlds together safely.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's so stressful because I think especially when I work with first-time parents in particular that I'm thinking about, right? And they're like, the dog is my first baby, right? Like, that's how the world is nowadays, which is so cool. But then it's like, okay, that you do kind of have to balance it in a way. You may be a first-time parent to a baby, but you have another baby, fur baby at home, right? So navigating, the jealousy of it and the introductions and the balancing act of it all is truly a balancing act.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, when people start to have that first concern, and I'll have people come to me, before the baby's born,
Yep.
concerned about, oh, well, we have this dog. He's 6 years old. He's never liked kids, but we've just never been around kids. Now we have a baby coming, and
Right.
what do we do? And there's often a lot of guilt and stress because you've gone through, especially if you're a first time parent, you've maybe gone through your whole life with this dog,
Right.
um, without having to have to really face maybe some of those behavioral issues head on, and you can kind of avoid it, and you
Absolutely.
leave the dog home, and you don't take him to see the nieces and nephews, and it all works out pretty well. But now when the baby's coming to your house, all of a sudden things become a little bit more real. So there's definitely a lot of guilt, and well, maybe we didn't do enough early on, and
Right.
but also the relationship you have with the dog. And I remember, you know when my oldest, he's 10 now, but when he was first coming home from the hospital, well, he was a little older, I guess, once he was started crawling and walking, is at our lab. It was
Yep.
our first baby. He was probably 3 or 4 years old. Started growling at him, and we had that conversation of like, all right, what do we do?
What do we
You
do?
know, and I was already a professional trainer at that time. But being a professional trainer, I had seen the aftermath. I've seen a lot of bites. I'd heard a lot of stories. I'd seen a lot of those things. So I
Right.
took it maybe extra seriously. I think my wife and I were probably more on the extreme as far as the protective of the kid
Absolutely.
over the dog, right? Because I'd seen it
Yep.
so much. But we had that conversation, and when it comes to like when I'm advising people, I created a term for myself. I call myself a kid's first dog trainer, which is not a real certificate or anything, so don't
Yeah.
Google it. But it's a term
Go
I made
Google
for
it.
myself. Yeah. But it's a term I use for myself because for me it comes down to really what's best for the kids first,
Yep.
even over the dog. I love dogs. I've been doing this for a long time. I love dogs, but our kids are our first priority now.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of in our culture. This is my controversial hot take, but there's a lot in our culture, and there's a lot of guilt people have if they have to choose their kid over their dog.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of rescues that maybe don't know enough about the dog, and the dog gets adopted out to not a good situation, or maybe there's some dogs who just have genetic issues that make them unfit for family life. So people have a hard time maybe making that nuclear option when it comes to the kids. So I'm here as a professional to say if you feel like it's in the best interest of your kids, that's fine. Like that's first. We want to do the best for the dog. I've got some great things to help you out, but the kids always come first. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think when we're looking at, and this is kind of, I guess we're kind of going into the worst case scenario first, but when
Right.
you're going into, if you do feel like there is a risk that your dog poses to your kids, going through, like as a trainer, we help you come up with management strategies and safeguards and things like that. But the question always comes down to is what happens when those safeguards fail,
Right.
right? So there is a percentage, and I can't decide this. You have to figure out what it is, but there's a certain percentage chance where the things you put in place, the management strategies, if that's the baby gates and the dog kennels and the training and stuff like that, there's a certain place where it's going to fail. The human error. We all make mistakes. As parents, you're super busy, you're stressed. There's 100 things going on, and sometimes that managing the dog falls through the cracks. And so you have to ask yourself, what happens when those safeguards fail? What is that? Is it a scratch? Is it a nip? Is there a more serious dog bite? And so I think it's important just to be clear eyed at the beginning of the conversation, like what is at stake with that, right?
Right.
So what happens when those safeguards fail, and then what's the percentage chance that those safeguards would fail? If there's a partner that's not really on board with it, those things usually don't happen. Or, if grandma and grandpa come over and they're just not paying attention, they let the dog out of a room when they shouldn't, so there's human error that creates those. So that's ultimately
Right.
for the parents to decide what that is. Now, that being said, we have a lot of people come to us that are really nervous and really apprehensive. And they discover that, hey, with some proper training and structure, the dog actually makes a pretty good turnaround and
Right.
they're great moves. And that's what happened for my wife and I is I just kind of doubled down on some of the things that I got
Yep.
lazy on. And he was a great dog and lived a long, happy life with us. So I think it's important to start off with kids first, but realize that too, that often there's so much progress we can make with training that we don't want to be despairing at the start.
Absolutely. I think people are so nervous to bring up all of the options when it comes to what may happen, right? And to think about that worst case scenario of, well, maybe this dog doesn't fit well now that we're having, children. And I think that's really, really hard for people, as it should be, right? Like you create a bond in a relationship,
Right.
but like you said, you really do have to kind of prioritize those kiddos, and especially to your point of, you know, especially when they start moving, right? Like the first few months of them just being a blob, like in a bassinet somewhere, like, okay, is what it is. You can probably separate and be fine. But once kiddos start to move, it's not fair to their development or fair to the dog to be kind of like, locked up and caged up in one space. And so it can be really challenging, but I think it's really important, like you said, to kind of take into consideration all the options and to set those boundaries of like, okay, this is when we decide to do this, or this is when we decide to do that.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. And the dog relationship with the baby, like you said, evolves quite a bit. So the newborn is kind of smells funny and makes funny noises, but usually not that interesting. But once the baby's on the floor, they're in the dog's domain and
Right.
they're reaching for the dog. They're crawling towards the dog bed. They're grabbing dog toys. That's where, in my experience, that's where that relationship first becomes contentious
Right.
is because now there's actually something happening versus just noises and smells.
Absolutely. And that movement typically is coupled up with a lot of like food things too. I find that that's around the same age bracket where babies are starting to start eating solids and things like that. And I know like, yeah, food and then like that aggravation of like babies coming after dog or grabbing toys and things that are theirs tend to be what I find my clients are like the most stressed out about is those two things. Specifically the food thing. So I'm so interested. Well, I guess I should rewind back for a quick second. I guess my first question for you is when is the right time for people to be reaching out for support when it comes to if they're worried about their dog? Should they be reaching out like before they're even pregnant if possible? Should they be doing it prenatally? Should they wait and see how things go and do it postpartum? Is there like a sweet spot to kind of introduce some training skills?
I would just say the sooner the better. If
Okay.
you have any concerns at all, just go ahead and reach out. Because a lot of these things are relationship dynamics within the household, and those can take some time to
Right.
change. So don't wait until you're 2 weeks from your due date and then try to fix the dog. We start before that.
Absolutely. Okay. And then as we go along this process here, I'll go with this question next then. A lot of people will ask me that like initial meetup, right? Like there's so many things online that you see that you can do to help like pets to adjust whether they have great behaviors or not so great behaviors. I know a lot of people talk about the whole like bring a blanket in that might smell like them or something like that. Are there any tips or tricks along those lines that you typically find help with that immediate adjustment of bringing baby home for the first time?
Well, I think I mean, those are things that are fine to do. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's usually not a panacea that if you just bring in the blanket and the
Right.
smell and all of a sudden the dog's like, oh, this is great. Because again, think relationally. No, there's a lot of those things that dogs, and every dog's gonna be different. So we have to talk in broad terms here, but
Right.
there's plenty of dogs that do have the smells and the new crib and all the furniture rearranging. Those things can stress a lot of dogs out. There's also they pick up just on the hormonal changes with mom.
Right.
The general energy level, stress level of the house is different. Their schedules are different. So there's lots of things that change that the dog picks up, and they pick up on everything.
Right.
But mostly, I would say is kind of the leadership from the parents is what makes the biggest difference,
Okay.
right? And then you mentioned kind of like the food thing, and I think one important thing to point out is that the common advice is you have your dog and you tug its ears and its tail and you press with paws and you put your hand in the food bowl and stuff like that, which is fine. But that cannot become give us a false sense of security because
Right.
this is where a lot of those fights happen. Where
Yeah.
let's say dad can go and is like, oh yeah, I can like take the bone out of his mouth and I can put my hand in his mouth and I can pick him up. He doesn't do anything to me. Well, that's because he has a certain relationship with you,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that sort of we'll say social dynamic is very relationship dependent. So lots of dogs will take all sorts of crap from their owners
Right.
but they have a good relationship. Doesn't mean they're going to take that from the veterinarian or a stranger or your kid.
Right.
So don't kind of assume because the dogs behave well with you that they're going to do that for your baby, right?
Which I think a lot of people don't realize because I do find a lot of people that I know that are like, oh, yeah, we have the sweetest dog. And then when I go to their house or when their kiddo gets older, they start to see a lot of issues, right? Or like baby starts to cry and like dog, or when parents are hanging out with baby a lot, like dog gets super jealous. Or like there are things that happen that I think people don't anticipate seeing because they've seen their dog from their specific relationship.
Exactly. Yeah, we had worked with a Chihuahua a little while ago that whenever the dad would pick up the baby to give him the bottle, the dog would run up and bite the dad's foot.
Oh, wow.
And it was just weird, but it was funny. But we worked through it. But yeah, so dogs do weird things.
Yeah, they definitely sense like little random things. Is there like a specific, or I shouldn't say specific, maybe a common thing that come up that people reach out to you about when it comes to children and dogs? Is it often kind of that food thing? Is it the tugging of the tail in the ears, or just basic safety things? Is there, or all of it? I mean, really, but is there something that you're typically seeing the most of?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of spatial resource guarding is probably the
Oh,
primary thing. And by that I mean it's the dog is going to be less receptive to the kid kind of coming up with the dogs on the bed,
yep,
on in their crate. And the food and the bones plays into that a little bit, but it also could be around mom, right?
right.
So a lot of dogs have that mommy addiction. And now when the baby's coming in, the toddlers wanting to walk up. mom's trying to pet the dog on the couch, but then the toddler walks up and the dog's not so happy about it.
Right.
So really the most important, I think, social skill or most important dynamic that you need to be able to have with your dog at home is the ability to create distance and separation with your dog. Okay. So think of it, we call this a permission-based lifestyle. So for your dog, most people have what I call good dog syndrome, which means the dog's a really good dog. But then there's a couple of these things that are a problem. Maybe it's with a kid or with guests or something like that, or with other
Right.
dogs. But a permission-based lifestyle, the dog needs to see you as a leader figure, as authority figure. Um, and so in the absence of that leadership, the dog will start to make some of their own decisions. And often those decisions, at least when people come to me, that decision starts to become a negative thing. Okay.
Mm.
So if the dog can go through all of its day and it gets to decide, I'm going to get on the couch now, I'm going to go bark out the window for a little bit, and I think I'll go get a crumb from the kitchen floor, I'm going to go get my toys, and I'm going to go up to dad for attention. So the dog's gone through the day, they've made all these decisions to be able to go take stuff,
Hmm.
okay, make decisions. And then the baby walks up and the dog goes, I don't like that, I'm going to growl at this baby. Then all of a sudden, mom and dad jump in and are upset with the dog or something like that. But from the dog's perspective, they go, well, gosh, I already made 99 decisions today. Why are you jumping in and trying to be upset about this 100th decision?
Right.
So from the dog's perspective, it's very inconsistent of us. So there's a lot of things that we need to do. These are great things to do for anybody, but
Yeah.
definitely before a baby comes is be able to have some of those structural things like being able to send your dog to their bed on command. So let's say you want to have company come over the house. You don't want the dog jumping all over people excitedly. That dog is going and taking that affection from them without permission. So you want to have the ability to have your dog go over to their bed and they can sit and wiggle and be happy over there. If people go say hi to the dog, they go give the dog attention, but the dog's not going up to take that affection from them. That
Hmm.
makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you want to be able to cook and you don't want the dog tripping you up by the stove. You need to be able to send them out of the kitchen.
Right.
Maybe you need to have someone over to the house and you need to put the dog in their crate and put them in a different room. They have to learn how to be okay with that. So creating that separation is really important on a mental level for our dogs. If you watch dogs interact together as like a pack, they never tell each other to sit and play dead and roll over. They say, back off, give me some space. Okay.
Right.
So that's very fundamental to how they communicate. The things that are important to them is that they can create that space. So when you can say, hey, Fido, I want you to go over there. I'm not going to pet you right now. I want you to go sit over there. That's what kind of flips that switch where Fido goes, okay, you're the boss. I don't get to decide everything. I have to look to you for permission with that. And I
Right.
would say that's probably one of the first things, the most important things that people need to start to establish.
And I think that idea is, I mean, it's something that I remember my family dog we did when we did dog training, right? Like we teaching them that their place, like, right? And I think that that's
Right.
so important when you have littles because you have to be able to like you said, send them somewhere that's their place. And also as your kiddos get older, it's also really great practice to be like, okay, that's the dog's place. Like if they're there, that's their way of saying they want space, right? Whereas when we talk about, child with child, pushing, biting, hitting, all these things that happen, we're like, oh, you need to tell them that you need space, right? Use your words. So if that's our way of explaining to children that like that's what the dog is saying, they want space, I think it's something that I can understand that probably makes a lot of sense for many different people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a good segue too into how we do need to have certain rules for our children to follow with the dogs. And for a toddler, it's more just you have to jump in and, supervise. But there is often, definitely from my perspective, too much. We often allow kids to invade a dog's space way too often, right?
Right.
So for me, and I have three dogs. They're all very well socialized, very reliable. I would say rock solid dogs. However, even for me, my 6-year-old is not allowed to hug the dogs, and you don't kiss the dog's faces. You just don't do that. For me, again, as a professional, that is just completely unacceptable. My dogs would take it; they wouldn't do anything. But any dog pushed beyond a certain line would behave negatively, or they might kind of try to control that situation. And as I usually say, dogs don't have thumbs, and so the only way they can interact is with their mouth,
Right.
and their mouth has a lot of teeth in it. So that's why we just don't want to have to get to that point. But we don't want to. In training the dog doesn't mean we teach them how to put up with abuse, right? How to be hugged and poked and prodded and and have their personal space invaded all the time. So there's also that really important discussion to have at home is, well, what do we allow
Right.
the kids to do to the dog? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it really is about boundaries and figuring out what it is. I mean, I talk to parents every single day about like how children are meant to push boundaries and you are meant to hold them, right? And so it is so important to know what your boundaries are and to be a united front when it comes to like, both parents in the household or really any adult that's consistently in the household, being able to know the kind of like quote unquote household rules, right? And knowing, this is what's expected in any aspect of life, especially with pets, because, if grandma comes over and starts doing these things with dog that toddlers not allowed to do, they're going to be confused. So being able to kind of have that consistency is super important. And I totally understand that part. Now, when you are working with dogs that are having, that the issues with that personal space kind of idea, or I think I keep thinking back to the food one because I feel like I hear that one all the time, right? Where like, the dog wants to jump up and try to get onto the high chair to get the food, or, baby has food in their hand and the dog comes up and tries to take it. Are there anything specific to those food topics that you can think of like tips or tricks that people could do on their own to kind of start implementing it like right now if they're listening?
So I guess if let's say the dog is just obsessed with food, they just want to go gobble stuff off the high chair and take it from the baby's hands and stuff like that. So I think that plays into that creating that space again as well. I think a practical thing. So let's say you want to be able to sit at the table and your toddler's in the high chair. And of course, dogs love toddlers in high chairs. My dogs know exactly where the good stuff happens.
They know where to sit,
Uh,
right?
they camp out, yeah, under the high chair and they're ready. And they're always rewarded because the baby always throws stuff off the high chair. But so maybe a practical thing to start with is just not allowing the dog to get on the high chair, get on the table. And so that means setting yourself up for success, which means you're going to have the dog on a leash. You're going to have to think one step ahead of the dog. We put the dog on a leash. So maybe you're sitting there at the table, holding the dog on a leash. Yes, he wants to jump up on the high chair. You're going to hold him down. And it's good for the dog just to get that experience of being, hey, you know what? I can be in the presence of the food and not be allowed to get it.
Hmm.
I don't think we have to go then give him treats and stuff like that. It's just, no, you're just going to sit here and you're going to be okay with the baby eating, you just kind of sitting and watching.
Yep.
We'll feed you in your crate or we'll feed you in the kitchen later. Right.
Yep. And I think it's I guess my question would be with children, obviously, consistency and boundaries are like very big things I talk about. Can I assume that with dogs, it's a very similar thing? Like, I feel like probably you have to do the same thing over and over, right? Like doing it once or twice, having them on a leash in the space where food is probably isn't going to do much. But I'm assuming that, by doing the same thing over and over, they start to kind of realize a little bit more.
Absolutely. That's what trainers harp on all the time is consistency.
Yeah.
And usually, we say that there's a lot of dogs that if they have a 1 in 100 chance of being successful, they think that's good odds. And like, oh, great, well, we'll keep trying it. And so you see them try 99 times, and even if they fail, if they get it that 100th time, they grab the food that 100th time, they go, hey, this is this is successful. I'll keep doing this. So it really does take that consistency. And just like you said with kids, I think dogs are similar in that they want to push your boundaries. They're going to find out exactly where those boundaries are and what's allowed and where the gaps are. So I don't know if being a dog trainer is maybe a better father, but I at least draw those comparisons quite a bit. So there's been plenty
Absolutely.
of times where I'm with my kids in a parking lot. If one starts to run away, I go, heel. Oh, wait a minute, you're not a dog. Um,
It's just the words that are typically coming out of your mouth. Yeah, I mean, I get it. And it's so true because I do think they're very similar minded in a lot of things, right? You have one set mind, you do one set track, you're going on, you want something, you want it to happen. And it really is, like we've both said, that boundary setting and then holding it. I think for kiddos, and then it sounds like for dogs, it's a very similar thing. Um, I know that you've been amazing in creating a document too that you sent over to me, which I'm definitely going to put in the show notes below so people can check that out. Because felt it awesome of just collecting some information that I think people will find really resourceful. Are there any other things in relation to children and dogs that you hear a lot about that you would want to share with people?
Well, I would say maybe more on the philosophical level, just what we were just talking about
Yeah.
is that need for structure for your dog. So that everyone, pretty much everyone I deal with is trying to have the best possible life for their dog, and they're trying to have the best possible life for their kids. And so there's often this unnecessary conflict between trying to provide well for your pet or your child and then the guilt you feel of having rules and creating the dog or put them on a leash and not letting them do this, do that. But a dog that has that clear leadership, that has that structure, that knows what's expected of them is overall the happiest, most balanced, well-adjusted dog. Right. And so with our pets, I think often we with pets, we often get a pet for ourselves,
Hmm.
right? You get a pet because of how it makes you feel to have a pet, which is fine. I do that with my dogs too. And with kids, it's easier for us to think long term. We're like, oh, this kid's going to be 25 years old one day, and you
Right.
start to think long term. We don't always think that way with our pets because you're
Mm,
kind of in the moment. Your dog lives in the moment. You're enjoying the puppy.
right.
You have your dog, but it does take a little bit of that start with the end in mind thinking of, but also maybe that tough love thing where you say, hey, I'm willing to provide some leadership. I'm willing to have some structure and some boundaries for my dog because I know that's what they need. And we often, whenever people think of dogs, we kind of have two extremes. And so one side of the road and one ditch, we have the fearful, barky, aggressive dog. And
Right.
everyone looks at that dog and it says that dog's not healthy emotionally, not well balanced. But then we have this other side of the road, this other ditch, where this is the dog that's like frantic and jumping on you and crying when you lock it out of the bathroom and just it seems happy and it's cute and wags its tail. But for me, those are the same dog. They are equally unhappy and unbalanced. They're both frantic. One's frantic to escape certain things. One's frantic to go up and get pet and touched and play and sniff and explore.
Right.
But both of those dogs are impulsive and have a hard time regulating themselves. And so I think they were equally unhealthy in that sense. And so when we have that structure where the dog knows what's expected, they have that clear leadership, you really see that kind of peace and confidence come into the dog because they go, oh, I don't have to go do X, Y, or Z frantically because mom and dad are in control. There's some rules, there's some expectations. And just like a kid, the dog that has those expectations is ultimately a happier, healthier dog because of that.
I think that that is such an interesting point because I never would have thought of it that way. And I'm sure other people are in agreement, right? Like, yes, you see the aggressive dogs and we think, oh, like that dog's not going to do great around children or not going to do great around, lots of groups of people or whatever you think, right? But we see these happily anxious dogs, right? And you don't typically think of that. But in a lot of cases, it can be just as equally worrisome, especially with children, because they are wanting to jump up and get pet and get loved. And oftentimes I can think about a couple dogs too that oftentimes they want that adult attention more too, which can cause that kind of jealousy, which is challenging to kind of combine with, baby that needs your attention for sure. Um, that's so interesting. Now, do you have any specific tips or tricks for people who may have like a very high energy dog that they have home? I find a lot of my clients will say, we haven't been as good at like taking dog for a walk or whatever since we've been home because we're just so tired with new babies. Or, the dog used to go on like hikes and stuff on the weekends, but isn't able to as much now. So is there anything that you can think of that you suggest to kind of help dogs that have high energy kind of burn that energy off? Because oftentimes I know it's a lot easier to handle them in the home when they have that
Right,
energy.
right. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the need for the mental and physical exercise and stimulation. So we don't expect that high energy dog to just be twiddling his thumbs for 18 hours a day and
Right.
not have any challenges with that. So getting the walks, playing in the backyard, your puzzle toys, playing fetch when appropriate, whatever those things you can do with your dog are great. But also what it boils down to as well is we don't want energy level to be an excuse for bad behavior. So
Mm,
going back to that calmness too, that maybe that high energy dog, is it just that it's a working dog and it has tons of energy? Maybe. Or is it just a frantic dog that has a hard time processing those new rules, not getting that attention, not getting that time on the couch and stuff like that? Is it having a hard time just adjusting to new family life?
Yeah.
Um, a great dog trainer, Sean O'Shea, came up with the term toxic contrast, and that if our dogs experience something that's just so different, let's say you've been working at home for years and all of a sudden you start going into the office, it's a toxic contrast, not because working at the office is bad or because your dog can't handle being at home, but just because it's the contrast. It's such a different, stark change from what they're
Right.
used to that that contrast is stressful. And so that could be, I think, often the amount of affection the dog gets. So maybe they go from being the center of attention to mom and dad come home and they love on the dog and they play in the backyard and they cuddle on the couch and watch TV and it's just
Yep.
everything about the dog. And now they have to go do the baby and they can't go on the walk and stuff. And just the dog, again, not being able to tolerate that separation is
Hmm.
experiencing that toxic contrast. And so this is where that leadership of, hey, I know you're hyper. I want you to go lay down in your bed. There's a bone. Go chew on that.
Yeah.
Stay out of the nursery or we put the baby down. So those rules, the structure helps the dog have confidence in its leadership, but also provides that mental stimulation where it just takes up some of that mental bandwidth. So if the dog's bouncing off the walls by having rules, I'm not allowed in the kitchen. I need to go sit on my bed. I can't get on the couch, whatever those rules are. Um, he takes up some of that mental bandwidth. So it's not just spinning and
Yeah.
frantic,
Yeah.
right? And whenever we have behavioral problems in our dog, we have a set of scales here. And on the right hand side, we have freedom and fun. On the left hand side, we have rules and structure and stuff like that. So whenever we have a behavioral problem in our culture, it means always 100% of the time that there's too much freedom. There's too much rule or yeah, too much freedom and not enough rules. So that means if we want to have that confident, balanced dog, we have to add in some rules. And what those rules are kind of arbitrary. Like it really doesn't matter so much. And people always go, well, do I have to not tell my dog you can't get on the couch anymore? We love him on the couch. And what about this or that? I really don't care what the dog is allowed to do, as long as we have some rules, and you get to decide what works for your family, what those rules are
Right.
that bring us back into balance. So some dogs with extreme behavioral problems, you need to throw every rule you can think of. So yes, they can't get in bed, they can't get on the couch, they can't do all that. Most dogs, it's not that case. But you have to have something that brings them back into emotional balance again.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think that even just in this short time that we've been chatting, it's so easy to see that comparison of like, okay, dogs need boundaries just like babies do, right? And then just kind of what you were just mentioning, dogs have a hard time with change, which a lot of people do, right? Like, and I think that there's so many connections and I think especially with dogs not being able to really communicate in the way that we would, right? Like you're not sitting down and talking to them and being like, listen, I'm going to be going to work in the office soon. And like they don't comprehend it to that extent. So yeah, it feels like such a harsh change for them. And that makes total sense that it can be, stressful to them. And especially with, like you were mentioning earlier, moving around the house, getting new furniture, there's new baby items now around. Dogs are probably stressed out. I feel like I know my family dog used to freak out when we'd take the suitcases out. Like they know little things, right? And then all of a sudden, now, you come home with this new being, like they kind of knew something was changing, but they didn't know what it was going to be. So that's so interesting to kind of put into perspective.
Yeah. And when your dog notices those things, we don't want to play into that anxiety. So the saying is you get what you pet. So whenever you pet your dog or you talk softly, you coddle them, whatever mental state they're in, you're going to get more of that. So this people often create this cycle where something happens, they got out the suitcases, let's say, and the dog is hyper and shaking, and we go, "Hey, Fluffy, it's okay. What's wrong? Are you scared? We're not going to leave you. We're going on vacation." And the dog takes that soft voice and that assurance as, "Hey, this mental state I'm in, I'm getting some positive feedback for that. I need to do more of this." Right now, they don't express it in those terms because they're
Mm.
dogs, but they continue in that state. They had some dopamine come in. They
Uh-huh.
keep doing what they were doing, and so or another example is, people create that anxiety where the dog is nervous about something. Um, and we go, are you scared? Why are you nervous? And the dog goes, why are you acting so weird? And the dog gets more nervous. We go, now you're really scared. And we get that cycle where the dog is feeding off us, where instead if you just had you're fine, like this nonchalant, no, you're fine. It's just a suitcase, sit down. The dog will go, oh, okay, you're right. Yeah, no big deal. We're gonna be fine. And so it's important that we do kind of demonstrate the mindset we want our dogs to have by saying, yeah, we're not going to, if you're scared of a thunderstorm, we're not going to freak out about it. I'm just going to hold the leash. We'll sit and watch TV. Like I'm going to pretend nothing's happening. If you're scared of the dishwasher's making noise or an airplane flies overhead or the baby's crying, I'm not going to coddle the dog by trying to reassure them, because people always want to reassure the dog. Problem is the dog interprets that as feedback to keep thinking and behaving a certain way.
Those are so interesting. All the things that I'm learning today myself, and I don't even have my own dog in my house. I feel like I'll be ready though. I love it. I think that's so cool and so interesting. And I feel like we could probably talk about this for like forever and ever. But I think that kind of giving people this kind of start of, okay, here's some information. Take what you like, use what you'd like, reach out to Phil if you need more. And like I said, I'll definitely attach the document that you've created into the show notes below, as well as having all of Phil's information in the show notes for people to check out. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.